Hello, everyone. Welcome back. So, today we're going to be talking about substance use disorder, and the brain, and how trauma kind of fits into all of that. So, first, let's kind of talk about addiction and abuse. And what that kind of looks like in a family. So, for many of us, we've had people in our lives that we love very much that deal with substance use disorder. And what we kind of notice about people with this disorder is that they use a substance too often. They're not able to stop when they want to. They use when they're saying they're not going to. And then they build up a tolerance. So, for example, if 2 wine glasses is enough for tonight, a month later it might be 3, a year later it might be 3 bottles of wine. So the tolerance gets more intense and more. And then there's withdrawal symptoms. So there will be things like having shakes, for example, with alcohol use. If it's opiates, you might notice like throwing up or having chills. So it's using it more often, using it when you don't want to, having withdrawal symptoms and building a tolerance is kind of how we define like substance use disorder. So 3 out of 4 people with substance use disorder have a history of some major trauma, and that means that in the ACEs questionnaire, which we've talked about before, if you score about 4 or more, that's what we consider like a number that we kind of want to keep an eye on for people, because they'll have more mental health disorders, or they may experience substance use disorder, depression, anxiety, that kind of thing. So people with scores of 4 or more, then we just want to keep an eye on them. And typically, if we're looking at substance use disordered clients, then we see about 3/4 of those have had 3 or more ACEs, or 4 or more ACEs, I'm sorry. So, why does this happen? Like, what is going on in the brain that people with ACEs tend to have more substance use disorders? So let's think of it as like a bush. So our brain is like this amazing bush, and we're going to prune it as we get older. So as we grow, our brain from birth starts to prune itself. So it's like, I need to understand language. I'm going to keep that. But I don't really need to understand like Chinese or Spanish. So when I hear those kind of words, I'm not really going to pay attention. My family speaks English. I'm going to listen to English dialect and English things that make sense to me and my family. So you start to learn the sounds of your own language. And if a sound doesn't fit into your language, that's kind of pruned out of the way. It's an example for language. When you're thinking about thoughts and how your brain thinks, if your brain is constantly in a state of fight or flight, where it's like, I need to pay attention to this, I need to pay attention to that sound. Every time before mom gets really angry, she's drinking, and I hear her voice be louder, so I'm going to make sure that I pay attention to that. So if your brain is constantly in the fight or flight response, and you're always in your hind brain kind of thinking, how do I survive? The front part of your brain, the thinking part of your brain, doesn't need to be as active. You really don't need to know how to add 2 + 2 = 4. You really don't need to think about your social studies project and like why the Mayans built the pyramids that they built. You really don't need to know how to have like critical thinking skills and understand like, should I make this choice or should I make that choice? Should I do my homework first or should I eat first? Because you're not in the front part of your brain, which is where those decisions are made. You're in the back part of your brain, which is the survival part of your brain. So you're always like this. You're always being flipped on and off with the back part of your brain. So if food comes around, you're always going to take it, you're always going to hoard it, if that's a thing. Like if you guys have food insecurity or your family withholds food as a punishment. If you are abused often or neglected often, homework may not be a big concern, but listening for that person's voice may be a concern for you. So the thinking part, the decision-making part of your brain doesn't get pruned as much. It kind of like doesn't grow as much. But the hind part of your brain, that is extremely strong for you. You have a very strong hind brain because that's what's been protecting you and keeping you safe. So as you are growing up, your decision-making skills, if you look at it through an MRI scanner, that is not lighting up as much as someone who doesn't have the ACEs. So, as a teenager, when someone presents you with a cigarette or alcohol or marijuana or a pill or whatever, your decision-making skills are already kind of lower than someone who's been able to prune those and make those super strong in their life. Add that to someone who is modeling that behavior possibly at your house. So you may have a parent or guardian who is using alcohol or drugs. Maybe that's part of your ACEs. So if you're seeing that behavior modeled every day, they're home from work, they're stressed out, they're having a beer. They get home from work, they're stressed out, they have a beer. And then you're in your adolescent stage, or early adulthood. You go to work or you go to school, you get stressed out, you go and have a beer, and your family may even be giving that to you, or be giving you a pill to say, you look stressed out, take this Ativan or whatever. So your brain is already not developing quite at the speed, at least your frontal lobe, as peers. You're maybe having this modeled at home that alcohol or substance use is a way to handle stress. And then you may be self-medicating. So once you experience that for the first time, then you're like, wow, I actually feel good. I don't feel depressed. I feel like I can do things. I feel social. It just kind of alleviates that anxiety. Where people who don't have substance use disorder or don't have family members with it, they're like, wow, that's a crazy feeling. I might try that again, I might not. But a lot of people with trauma latch onto that feeling because it feels good. And they don't get that feeling anywhere else. So, what do we do about it? Right? Well, there's a lot of things we can do. First of all, I encourage anybody that's in middle school or higher to take their ACEs questionnaire and let your counselor know. I would encourage anybody in education that's a teacher or whatever to give your students the ACEs questionnaire. They have a child one too. And if you want information about that, you can always send me a message. But that can kind of give your counselor and you some ideas of this kid needs to be looked at. This student needs some extra love and care and support, or this one needs some coping skills work because they may not be getting that at home. So I would say at a very young age, 7th, 8th grade, start with the ACEs questionnaire. Give it every year. That's fine. It's totally fine. And that can just kind of let us know who to look at. It's not a tool to call CPS or have some turned in. That's not it at all. That's not what we're going to be doing. This just helps us identify a student to maybe do some one-on-one counseling with, or some group counseling, some peer mentoring stuff with. I would say the next thing is get students involved in things. Starting in middle school, high school, elementary school, you want to do gymnastics and cheerleading and soccer and baseball and softball and theater and photography. Whatever you can get your student into or your child into, whatever things can excite them, field trips, because that mimics the same thing as using a substance for the first time. So when you use a substance for the first time, your dopamine level gets shot up. You're like, yay, this is super fun. But the other thing that can do that in an adolescent, teenage, or young adult's brain is a new experience. So if they're like, oh my gosh, my team is going to get to go to the playoff game next weekend, I'm super excited to be able to do that. That sends that dopamine. Oh my gosh, I just learned to do this new flip and it's super new to me and I'm so excited to show it off. Dopamine. My photography class is learning this new technique. Dopamine. Yeah. So any new experience you can give them hits that dopamine receptor, and it's like, this is what your child can get addicted to become an adult that tries new things and it continues to do sports and hobbies and things like that, instead of doing the substances that other students may be trying. So that is a really big one. There's a ICE study, it's ICE study. In Fayette County, West Virginia is actually doing this right now and working with their students to help get kids involved in things, because it is one of the number one ways to keep adults from having substance use disorder. So that's very exciting stuff. You can do this at home or in your classroom. Not stigmatizing substance use as a moral issue and instead thinking of it as a public health issue. So most of us would consider like child abuse as a health issue, like to hit your child and they are hurt is a health issue. However, when the child starts to use substances because of the health issue, we're like, oh, they're just making poor decisions, they're just making bad decisions, they're a bad kid. That simply isn't true. It has nothing to do with your moral content or code as a person. It's just a way that you are learning to cope, and or have learned to cope, or have been forced to use, starting at a young age or even adulthood. And this is the way that you've learned to cope with some of your ACEs and things that's happened in your life. That is not a moral problem. Some people do many other things that are very unhealthy, and we consider those health concerns. So treat people gently and kindly and give them compassion whenever you run into someone who is struggling with something like substance use disorder. We're all struggling with something, and that kindness and that generosity and seeing them as a person instead of a bad person, just a person in whole, can really change that person's life. So keep that in mind also. Some small things you can do in your house is take the pills away. So protect your kids from pills, lock those up, even if it's, something over the counter. The kid can get high from allergy medication or stuff like that. So it doesn't just have to be your opiates. Lock them all up. Let kids know that medications are used for medicine. They're not just thrown about the house. So, it's important to protect. It's important to only use them as prescribed. That kind of key thing. Keep those in your house. And start even in kindergarten, teaching kids, even your children or your students, that medication is not safe unless an adult gives it to you. Do not take anything, even an aspirin or what they think might be a vitamin, without an adult actually handing it to you and telling you it's safe to take. And then just teach healthy coping skills. So school counselors and clinicians, just helping parents and teachers understand healthy coping skills. And those skills can be learned in the classroom with a kid like super frustrated and just like, I don't know what to do. It can be sending them to the school counselor. It can be a mental health counselor. It could be you as a parent. Instead of saying like, yeah, that was terrible, like you did terrible on that paper. Instead, you can say, wow, that probably felt kind of bad that you didn't do so good on that paper. What can you do better next time? Or I'm seeing you're feeling very frustrated. How can you handle that? So stuff like that can help you start a dialogue with your student or your child and kind of lead things in the right direction in the classroom, at home. And coping skills, which is your frontal lobe. So you as a teacher, if you are teaching these frontal lobe things, the executive function, frontal lobe, decision-making things, then that's going to help grow those things instead of pruning them down if they're having ACEs in their home, and you may not know. So the more you can talk and learn and teach them about healthy coping skills and resilience and knowing grit, the more this part of their brain is going to keep on growing. So I hope this was helpful. If you have any questions, you're welcome to leave comments below. And if you guys need anything, let me know. Have a great day.